Right, so text response essays are generally very, I guess formulaic is the wrong word. We don't want you to write a formulaic essay, but they do have a very particular structure that you do need to follow, and if you follow that structure, you should produce something that is in line with the criteria. And you should produce something that allows you to demonstrate the understanding and the knowledge that you have. Obviously, with any essay, there are a number of things that are going to affect the quality of what you write. Number one is your knowledge of the text and your ability to make interpretations of that text. That comes, I can't teach you that. I can point stuff out to you in the text, and I can teach you how to then use the things that you've made and perhaps how to articulate them, but I can't actually make you see things. I can encourage you, but you have to obviously have read it, you have to be thinking about it, you have to engage in that evaluation and sort of consideration of what's going on. But that's going to affect how well you do in the essay. What I can teach you is the structure. That once you've made those interpretations, once you've gained those insights, once you're putting those pieces together, I can teach you how to structure that out on the page in a way that's going to produce a pleasing result in terms of your marks. As you're doing that, I can't tell you what evidence to use. I can't, force you to make fewer spelling mistakes or whatever it might be, but I can take one of those big thinking processes off your hands and give you some fairly clear-cut guidelines about how to write these essays. The only other big thing that is difficult, but I've given you over the course of the year a number of things to help with that, is breaking down the prompt requires, like an interpretation of the text, you do need to make an interpretation of the prompt, and I can cue you to how to do that, but I can't do it for you. So these are the things, I guess, that differentiate your marks. Okay. You've seen this handout before. I think I probably used almost the exact same handout for Cloud Street, but this essay is simpler. Text response, explore and discuss the ideas of the text and how the writer goes about doing it, communicating those. We need to start off by breaking down the prompt. We identify and articulate our thesis statement, that is what our essay is going to be, our response to that prompt. We break that down into a number of paragraphs, and Bob's your uncle. Okay. Once we break down our paragraphs, we can think about how many pieces of evidence we're going to use, and we can follow a structure for those paragraphs that you would know as teal. Okay. And I'm going to give you another mnemonic today. I can't remember if I gave it to you last time or not, but I'm going to give it to you again today.
Is it the hamburger?
Yeah. No, the hamburger is the visual representation of the entire essay. So if you can't remember the hamburger, it is the introduction and conclusion of the bun, and then all the good stuff in the middle, the stuff that's really interesting, is the paragraphs. But I'm not going to focus on that too much because I think we've got that down. But what I'm going to focus on particularly is, because where all the marks are, is in what goes into each paragraph, which is the teal structure. I'm going to use your hand, your left hand, as a mnemonic for that. Okay. So I've got a few prompts there. I'm going to come back to those in a moment, and then this is page 23 of your PDF of the new material handout, and the next 10 pages are essentially details on what I'm going to go through today. And I will go through them on the board, but you can read through them again at your leisure. Included in the next 10 pages are 10 practice prompts. Now, Brooklyn is great as the text to do late in term 3 because the essay prompts that you're likely to get on the exam are highly predictable. I don't know what the wording will be, but I know what they'll deal with. The 10 practice prompts that we're going to give you will most likely cover, sort of 80% sure, will most likely cover any of the prompts that you're likely to get in the exam. You can back that up by going back over the last couple of years of exams on the VCAA website and seeing that the prompts that have been there are essentially reworded versions of these. Okay? So hopefully that trend continues this year. Of course, nothing is certain. So we'll just go a little bit further, and then we'll come back to those practice prompts. All right, so our essay structure, as Richie quite rightly reminded us, no, Joe quite rightly reminded us, sorry, is essentially a hamburger. So, I recently was reviewing a Year 7 English textbook, and guess what was in it? The hamburger structure. So, I stole it from someone, they stole it from someone else. And
This likely you taught me it in Year 7.
Yeah, I think I was taught it at university, so in my teacher training. So, the hamburger, the intro, I've taken the analogy a little bit further than I was taught, but the conclusion and the body. Okay. Now, obviously, this is not representative. In terms of a 800, 900 word essay, we're talking about these being about 100 words each, and this being about 700 words. Because when you get a burger, the thing that you're most interested in, unless you're a hipster and you demand to have brioche, is what's inside the bun. What's inside the bun. The thing that's essentially a device to hold it together. Lord Sandwich, the guy that invented the sandwich, he really was. He was a keen, listen to the story. He was a keen poker player. Lord Sandwich, the Earl of Sandwich, sorry, I got it wrong. The Earl of Sandwich was a keen poker player and a card player, and he would play cards with his fellow gentry, and he didn't like the fact that he would turn and eat his salad and meat and get his hands dirty. And so what he demanded of his staff was to bring him the ends of the bread baked that day. He put his meat and his salad in there, and then he could keep his hands clean. That's the truth, that's simplified, but the true story of the creation of the hamburger. And so, the sandwich, which becomes the hamburger. So it's not about this, it's about this. It's about the body theory. Okay?
Where did you learn it?
It's true, I don't know. You look it up, right? I've simplified it, but that's essentially what it is. Okay, the essay, that means, is one discussion, contained by the intro conclusion, and then broken up into a number of points that weave together. Okay? In your introduction, some really basic things. You have to plan your essay before you can write your introduction. You can't start the essay first 3 minutes of the sack time. Just bang out the essay. You need to plan the essay, okay? Because the introduction is going to include the title. It's going to include the author's name. Now the title, we know, must be underlined. In this text, it's really important to underline the title because you're going to refer to Brooklyn, the place, and you're also going to refer to Brooklyn, the novel. Okay? So you need to differentiate because your sentence will not make sense if I don't know which one you're referring to. You could change the meaning completely. So author's name and title. The author's name, full for first use, surname thereafter. Don't call him Colin only. He's not your mate, your next door neighbour. Okay, he's an author. We use his surname, but we need to introduce his full name first use. Okay. So that should happen in the first few sentences. You're going to have your overall response, which is referred to here as, think about perhaps rephrasing the prompt in a way that includes the key phrases, but presents them in a way that supports or suggests your own interpretation. Because you might challenge the prompt, you might disagree with the prompt, you might agree with part and not the other, and you need to change the wording of the prompt in such a way that shows us that response, but you need to keep those key phrases because you want us to know that you are responding to it. This was a problem for some people in the Cloud Street essay. So your overall response, and then you need to flag the main ideas that you'll deal with. Okay, flag the main ideas. What I mean by that is not necessarily a sentence on each paragraph. Okay, it might be 2 or 3 sentences in total, but those 2 or 3 sentences contain, you know, the subject matter of the 3 or 4, hopefully 4, paragraphs that you're intending to write. Fairly clear cut. It's a formula. I would almost do it in that order. Okay? You can weave the title and the author into your overall response and then flag your main ideas. It's maybe 4 to 5 sentences. Okay? What I don't want to see in the introduction is evidence. Okay? I do not want to see any specific evidence from the text. I also don't want to see any detailed explanation of the ideas. Okay? I don't want to see that. That's what the body is for. If you do any of that in the introduction, you're going to have to do it again in the body paragraphs and it's just going to become repetitive. Okay, you have a question?
Would you still recommend doing the intro last?
Yeah, so some people like to do the introduction last. They like to leave the space and do the introduction last. The reason for that is that some people find that as they're writing it, they deviate from their plan. I think that happens if you haven't done much practice. So if you haven't done much practice, keep that up your sleeve, but hopefully you've done enough practice. The better thing to do is to plan out your essay in detail. You know, take 10, 15 minutes in the SAT maybe, 5 to 10 minutes in the exam. And know where you're going, be confident that you're going in the right direction, be confident that you're going to stick to that. And because you're not doing any detailed explanation or examples, that's the stuff that will deviate as you're writing. But the main contention, the main points, the main arguments you're going to make, that won't change that much. All right? So part of the reason you don't really want to do that is it probably is not very fluent if you write it out of sequence. Okay, so that's the introduction. The conclusion, I'm going to jump to that, and then we're done with that structure. The conclusion is essentially the same as this, but in a different order. Essentially, you're going to work back through your points. So, in a sense, you're going to flag the main ideas, but in the order, in the reverse that they were presented. So, if the introduction is sort of like, this is what my essay is about, I'm going to talk about this, this, and then this. Your conclusion is, I've just spoken to you about this, and before that this, and before that this. So you're leading the reader back through. You want to follow that logical structure, okay? It's, when you're doing these essays in Year 7, when Ms. Whiteley taught you the hamburger method, she might not have worried too much about that because you were writing maybe 2 pages. If you're writing 4 to 5, maybe even 6 pages of material, leading the reader back through the logic of the order of things that you've presented actually is going to help you end with a big punch. Okay? So lead us back through the points, but again, don't spell out each one as a sentence. Try and link them together, and then finish with your overall point, your overall response. Just don't use the exact same wording as you did in the introduction. Remember, my tip for changing your phrasing is to change the order of information in the sentence. So if your overall response was, Ailish begins the novel as a passive young woman but finds strength in individuality and independence, and this is the message that Tobin wants us to take away from reading the novel, but that's a benefit. You might end your essay with, Ailish eventually understands and tells us that it's important, or shows us that it's important to live a life with independence and individuality, thereby changing yourself from the passive girl that she began the novel as, and this is what Tobin wants the reader to do as well. Same information, I've just reversed the order. Okay. So, same information, reverse the order, leads back through the points, and then end with your overall response. Cool? You'll notice in my examples, talking through that structure, I'm saying things like, my essay is going to be about this, I'm going to talk to you about this and that. We don't want Any I statements? Okay, you don't refer in formal writing to yourself or the task. My essay will be about, I will be discussing. None of that. Okay? That's not formal. Okay, is there any questions on the introduction and conclusion part? Because that's the easy part. That is almost a formula. When you're doing a practice, if you want to check that you've done it correctly, essentially you can just look at these notes here and go, tick, done that, tick, done that, tick, done that. And then the only thing that's going to differentiate you from anyone else is the quality of your expression in that section. If you've got those things, you've done it right, the difference will be how well have you expressed it. That's it. Okay? If this is 4 to 5 sentences, this is probably about the same. Maybe slightly less, maybe 3 to 4 sentences. Because obviously, in the introduction, that's the first time I'm hearing it. In the conclusion, it's the third time I'm hearing it. Because I heard it in the introduction, I've heard it in the body paragraphs, and this is the third repetition, so it can be briefer. Okay, 3 to 4 sentences. Cool. I'm going to take an absence of questions as an indication that that is understood. We are going to look at some examples, and you'll have some time to clarify once you're doing some work yourselves as well. Okay, paragraphs. Here we go. You've got this written out in front of you, so I'm not going to write anything about this on the board. I'm going to show you another way to remember it. Paragraphs have to contain the material that proves that you know the text, the material that demonstrates your ability to meet the criteria that you're being assessed by. So what are the criteria? You have a response to the text. You understand that it has ideas or values that are underlying the storyline that the author is communicating. You talked about how the author is communicating those through the text, and you've used meta-language and text-appropriate terminology in that discussion. And you've written well. 5 things, right? Let's forget the written well, that's all the way through. But those first 4 things, your interpretation, your understanding that the writer comes to us, or the text comes to us with a preconceived set of notions, it's written by a person who has opinions and values, and that those bleed through. And then you've discussed how those bleed through, how they're communicated through the character's actions, choices, writing style, all of that. And you've used the appropriate terminology. That's all being done in the body of the essay. You have reference to, in the introduction, your overall response, your interpretation, but that's really it. You're then going to explore that in your body paragraphs. The intro and conclusion suggest what you're going to talk about. The body explores that. It's the discussion, it's the elaboration, if you like. So teal, as it's spelled out there, I'm going to write it really simply up here. T-E-E-L. Teal is a simple mnemonic, simple memory tool, acronym if you like, that is the parts of your paragraph. Topic sentence is like a mini introduction. Yeah, it's essentially just a sentence that tells us what the paragraph is going to be about. So I'm going to talk about this particular aspect of my overall response in this paragraph. That's the function. So you only have one of those. That's sentence number 1. Always has to be sentence number 1. First thing you see. Examiner, myself, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews are all going to expect to see and be able to tell what that paragraph is going to be about by just reading the first sentence. If what you write in the paragraph and what you wrote in the first sentence don't line up, your essay is not well written. Okay? You haven't discussed effectively and clearly the points that you're wanting to make. The last letter in the acronym, the L in teal, is the link. If you've broken your essay up into 4 parts, you've got an overall response, and there's 4 components, 4 essential questions that you feel you need to answer, then those 4 parts are each of the paragraphs. But you need to still be discussing the whole response. So the purpose of the link, which is the last sentence, maybe the last sentence or 2, always has to come at the end. Because it's essentially saying, having discussed all of that stuff in the middle of this paragraph, this relates to my overall response in this way. Okay? Or this relates to the underlying ideas in the text in this way. So these are pretty set in stone. Okay? You should know what these are going to be in your planning process. Because this is what my paragraph's about, and this is how that paragraph relates to the overall point. The 2 E's in the middle. Some people use different words for the E's. I use examples first, and then explanation second. So you see it's reversed on the screen. It doesn't really matter, but the reason that I like to talk about examples first and explanations second is that, I am a literature teacher primarily, and in literature you have to make evidence the centre of your discussion. I think that works really well in English as well. Okay? I think it works just as well in English as it does in Lit. But you can reverse those, you can do it in the order there. Essentially, the purpose of this section of the 2 E's in the middle is to elaborate on your topic sentence or prove it. So if I've said in my topic sentence, Ailish starts the novel as a passive character who lets other people make her decisions for her, that's my topic sentence, that's what my paragraph's going to be about, then I need to prove that and discuss and explain what I mean by that and what effect that has on the reader in the rest of that paragraph. So I think if you've made a statement like that, the next thing you want to show is where that comes from. Where in the text leads you to that opinion. So I think it's best to start with an example after the topic sentence. It means you get sort of like you jump-starting the discussion in the right place. Then the explanation is an explanation of how that evidence demonstrates the point you've made in the topic sentence. That to me is a very logical structure. What it says here is that your topic sentence is the introduction, but then the explanation is an elaboration on that. You're in danger of repeating yourself there. And actually quite a few of you, when you did Cloud Street, you're in danger of contradicting yourself there. Because you feel like you've got to write more about that, but you don't necessarily have more to say about that broad idea, and so you sort of end up waffling and end up contradicting yourself. So I think you're much better, it's much safer, it's much more concrete to go from topic sentence to examples. Explain how the example proves the topic sentence, and then you move on. Now this is a cycle. Okay? We want to go through that about 3 times. Because you want a number of pieces of evidence in the paragraph. If you think about the one that I wrote up on the board the other day, it had about 4 bits of evidence in it. Okay? So 3 cycles through the example and explanation. And my suggestion to you is that it's usually a good idea to follow the logic of the text. Okay? Follow the logic of the text. And that's usually the storyline. It's following the order that it happens in. Be careful with that, not to just retell the story. If you just give me the examples, and you spend most of your time giving them to me, and there's not a lot of explanation of why you're giving them to me and what they show, you will retell the story. So the balance here, the focus, is on this. That's where the marks are. The marks live in the explanation. Okay? That's a very quick recap and revision of the teal structure. Everyone can go and write a paragraph now. Now, if that was the case, I'd make $1 million tomorrow, because I'd just sell that, and everyone in the world would be able to do it. The problem is that not everyone in the world can do that. If I say there's 4 parts to a paragraph and you do that, if you did that in year 7, I guarantee probably half of you wrote 4 sentences. Okay, and that's what generally tends to happen. 4 parts, 4 sentences. We probably want about 10 to 12 sentences as a paragraph, about 200 or so words. Okay, so that's hard to do on 4 parts. So I'm going to get you to take your left hand. If you want to write this out, you can sit there and let it wash over you, it just won't stick.
Is this a thing or
Yeah, so you're going to take your left hand, and you're going to do your left hand deliberately. Okay, I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about your hand in a minute. And you're going to trace around your left hand. Palm up. Palm up. Okay? Because you're going to go from left to right, and the left hand side needs to be the thumb. I'm going to do a drawing. That's terrible. And then I'll have another go, and it'll be just as bad. I wanted to be an artist a long time ago. Okay, there's my hand. It looks pretty ordinary, doesn't it? But you're going to take your left hand, and you're going to draw. So your little diagram is going to be better than mine, because you've actually got a hand. Unfortunately, I don't have a hand big enough to trace on the board.
Can you just go right hand face
You can go right hand face down, that's fine. But it gets the same result, but you need the thumb on the left. Now, this is something, the thumb needs to be on the left. Yeah? Because it needs to be palm up. Yeah? That's fine. But you need to have the thumb on the left, palm up.
It's technically wrong, isn't it?
Now, this is something that I came up with. This is devised by me. I've seen it now fed back at various places. I've seen this presented at a conference. But I guarantee you, I sat in the community room with a literature student a number of years ago who was having trouble remembering the very complicated version of Teal that literature students use, and they couldn't remember what came next. So, what I saw was them leaning on their hand like that, just going, I don't know what to do. And I went, okay, let's use something, you can't take notes into the exam, let's use something that they can't take off you, we're going to use your hand. And we just made it fit, right? So, on the diagram of your hand, I want you to draw in the knuckles. So, on your thumb, this is why it's palm up. So, on your thumb, there's 2 knuckles, there's that one little line. On the fingers, they're all broken into 3 sections. Your little finger has that too, but I'm going to let you leave your little finger just as one little thing, because it's a bit useless. Okay? Now let's pretend we're in some sort of anatomy class for a minute and talk about the design of your hand and the functions of your hand. Okay, as a mammal, as a human being, as a Homo sapien, the only thing that any other animal has in common with us, the thumb, is the ape, the greater apes. This thumb gives us a distinct evolutionary advantage. It allows us the grip motion, right? Because we have a thumb, we can grip things, we can grasp them, we can pick them up, gives us great strength. We're going to use our thumb and the idea that allows us to grip onto things to represent what needs to happen in a paragraph. When someone reads our paragraph, they need to immediately grasp our point. So your thumb is going to represent the topic sentence. Okay? And I'm going to break it into 2 parts. So we're going to work around the hand like that, with the thumb to the little finger, and we're going to work from the palm out. So the base of the thumb is the topic sentence. It is what your paragraph is going to be about. You want to write a better essay, you can elaborate or explain that topic sentence a little. Ailish is passive at the beginning of the novel, and this limits her. Might be my topic sentence. It limits her because it means that she's not able to make her own decisions, You know, general stuff about the character, or about the novel, or about the ideas, not specific evidence. Okay? So elaboration of the idea that you've raised. Now in this particular sack, what's beneficial here is that your topic sentence, you might like to write this down, this mnemonic works for the exam, okay? But what I'm going to write in red here is specific for this sack, for the criteria, okay? So the topic sentence is your interpretation, okay? If you think about those little passages we've been doing in class, this is your response, yeah? And the elaboration is identifying the ideas that the text is trying to explore, okay? So response versus those underlying themes.
Wait, so how does that not relate to the exam?
Well, because in the exam you might get a structural question, you might get a context question. There's different types, there's 4 different types of questions that you might get. So you might end up doing this style of question, most of them are, but it's not necessarily automatic. There's 4 different types of questions. We'll go over that. Alright, so that's your thumb. You can imagine, if we're trying to grasp an idea, we need to know what you think and perhaps a little bit of what that means. That allows us to grab onto the thing that you're about to talk about. That's how you remember what the thumb does, alright? Now, each of the fingers do this exact same thing. They make up this, okay, this E and E, yeah? The explanation and examples. Our thumb's good for grabbing stuff, but
Fingers are good for pointing.
fingers are good for pointing. No, that's not it. But actually, that's not where the strength in your hand is. Your strength in your hand is those middle 3 fingers. Yeah. So imagine, for instance, you're coming out of the shopping centre. You've done your fortnightly food shop, and you're carrying whatever. I'm trying to make it heavy, right? You're trying to carry all the bags out of the boot of the car in one trip. You're not carrying those with your thumbs out of the car, are you? You're not going, oh, like that. You've got all the bags hooked around those 3 fingers on each hand to the point that they're probably losing circulation. These fingers, these 3 fingers, they carry the weight, okay? They're the strength in your paragraph. Example and explanation, okay? So again, I'm just going to do one finger. They're all the same, but they're just each a piece of evidence. Okay, now, how much easier would life be if you had 6 fingers on a hand? It'd be fantastic. You play piano, awesome, right? It'd be much easier to play guitar, right? So if you can add a finger in there and get 4 bits of evidence, wonderful. But I think to have a good, strong paragraph, you need to have at least 3. And I'll expand on that a little bit in a moment, but let's get the basics down to begin with. Okay, before you provide evidence, before you provide the quote, the word, the image, you need to do some setting up. You could call this context, if you like. So you're not just going to whack the quote straight in. You need to do some setting up. And by this, what I mean is, normally, you might say, when Ailish is discussing her work at Miss Kelly's store, with Rose at the beginning of part 1, you're providing me with some sort of spotlight on where this material is coming from. Does that make sense? Only as much as I need, because I've read the text, I'm an expert in the text, so is the examiner, only as much as I need to understand where this is coming from. I don't need you to tell me the story, I know the story. I don't need you to tell me what she's wearing, you know, what's happened for the last 6 pages. I just need a suggestion. So the setting up of the context. Then you're going to have the actual evidence, okay? Your quote, whatever, image, word, language feature, and the explanation. Now, Have a look at your finger for me for a moment. It's one thing, isn't it? It's one thing. If I stripped all the flesh off that finger, there'd be 3 separate bones. But I'm not drawing a skeleton here, I'm drawing a fleshy, plump, healthy finger. This is one thing. This is not a sentence, a sentence, a sentence. It's threaded and welded together. It's all mashed up as one thing. So you can do all of that in one sentence. You can start your explanation before the example, like I did on the board the other day. Okay? But these things have to happen. Okay? You do have to start with the setting up. You generally do include the evidence and then explain it, but you might start that explanation in amongst the inclusion of the evidence if you like. But I think it's a good idea to think about working out that way, because what it's going to encourage you to do is to check after you've included the evidence that you have explained why it's there and what it's doing.
If it's like a big point that you're trying to make, can you use multiple sentences?
Yeah, this could be 2 or 3 sentences, but the 2 or 3 sentences is probably going to be involved in the explanation.
Yeah.
The setup and the example are probably tied up together,
Yeah.
and you might start the explanation, but then you might need another sentence to sort of, really discuss it, particularly if the evidence is quite complicated. Your examples shouldn't be more than, if it's a quote, shouldn't be more than about 6 to 8 words at most. The shorter ones, 4 or 5 words, are easy to remember. Okay, so you're going to do the same across all 3 of those, and you're going to grow a 4th finger if you can, a 6th finger, another one between your, what's that, your
Ring finger?
ring finger and your pinky. I had to look where my ring was, sorry. So yeah, your ring finger and your pinky. You're going to grow an extra finger there if you can.
Why?
4 bits of evidence is better than 3, right? If you look at my paragraph the other day, it had 4 bits. Okay. That's your link. This little piggy goes off and grabs the idea. These little piggies do all the heavy lifting. They're the evidence piggies. This little piggy goes wee, all the way home. Yeah? All the way home means overall point. So I remember it. Right? That's your link statement. Now let's take it up a notch. I want you to use meta language in this SAC. As I said, it's the thing that most students don't do, but it's the thing that will make a difference in your mark the easiest. One of the easiest ways to use plenty of meta language is to use a variety of evidence types, because then you're going to talk about language, you're going to talk about imagery, you're going to talk about symbolism and writer's voice and all those sort of things. So you might like to think, I'm going to use one quote, I'm going to use one image or symbol, and one extra. Okay? And that extra could be things like, in the example I gave the other day, it could be things like structure, language features, like the other day I did repetition. It might be about tone, okay? All those sorts of things. But it could be another quote, it could be another image, okay? But these ones are highly technical and they'll get you marks on the board straight away. Okay? This will take you up a notch. You can just think about, I want 3 bits of evidence, that's fine. But if you want to make sure that you're using meta language, you want to make sure you're showing me that you can do this stuff, those 3 things. And they don't have to be in that order. You might start with the symbolism and move to the quote. You might start with the repetitive use of language and then move to the image and then finish with a quote. They can be in any order, okay? But that's something to think about. Okay, so when you're sitting there in the SAC and you're like, I know what I want to say, but what the hell do I do? Face palm. There it is, right?
There's all the answers.
There's all the answers. Right?
You did write it on the thing.
Don't do that. I I have done this lesson before, and people have come in with topic sentence, elaboration. You know, it's written like this because it's easy to remember. Yeah?
Young adults too.
You should be able to remember it. I'm telling you, to the camera, it's on the camera. Do not write on your hand, right?
Is it cheating though? Is
Sorry?
that great because it's just for the sack?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So look, again, that's going to depend on the nature of the question. So yeah, that's my advice for this SAC, because it's going to hit that meta language criteria, and it's also going to hit that how does the author communicate these ideas criteria. Okay. So those are your paragraphs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's teal, which is that, 4 things, or there's the hand mnemonic, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 things. That breaks it down a lot more. So if you tend to not do enough in a paragraph, this makes it easier to do more. Okay, but just remember your fingers are not the bones, they're a fleshy object, they're one thing. Because otherwise we end up with a really disjointed set of dot points. Okay, cool? Anyone got any questions on that?
Richie, this is going to be good.
Just get that tattooed on your hand.
Okay.
Yeah, what if you did that?
Joe.
I want to talk briefly, but I'm not going to talk through all that's written here. I did the same thing with Cloud Street, and lots of people did not go and read it. And I tell you that you need to go back and read this, particularly if you know this is a weakness of yours. Okay. Inclusion of evidence. Evidence can be a range of things, as I've just said. Okay, it's got some different stuff here. Quote from the text, paraphrasing about the idea, imagery, tone, language use, all those things are evidence. Quotes aren't the only thing. And that's good to know because you can only memorise so many quotes. Okay? But, regardless of what evidence you're going to use, I need you to embed the evidence in the discussion. Embed the evidence. Okay? Embed the evidence in the discussion. What do I mean by embed the evidence? Sophie, what do I mean? I've written it on your work. Help her out, Tara, I've written it on your work. Help her out, Jack, I've written it on your work. Help her out, Jack, I've written it on your work. Help her out, Elaine, I've written it on your work. Embed the evidence.
Put it together.
Make it part of the sentence. Don't have it as a sentence on its own.
Make it fleshy.
It should read as part of the sentence. Grammatically, it should read as part of the sentence. So someone give me a quote that they think is useful from Brooklyn. Someone give me a quote that they picked out that they thought was useful.
She just did as she was told.
She just did as she was told. Right. So I want to use that in my paragraph about Ailish being passive and not having a will of her own, right? So I'm going to talk about the fact that she's passive. I'm going to say things like, well, maybe I'll write my topic sentence, right? So, Ailish is constructed by being as a passive character in order to warn the reader against this trait. Okay, that's my topic sentence. And it contains the elaboration as well, because I've started to talk about those ideas. Okay. I've used, let's continue my method that I've been doing. I've used 2 bits of meta language in there. Okay. Constructed is a piece of meta language because I'm talking about what an author does in terms of developing ideas. And I've used the word character there, but both meta language. If you don't have them in your glossary, add them in. But that's my topic sentence. Okay? Topic sentence in teal. Now I want to have some evidence, because I like to start with the evidence to make sure that it's central. So I'm going to try and use this quote. She just did as she was told. Where has it come from, Jack? Where was it?
Oh, when she was doing all the calculations in her new job, and the woman was standing over her, and she said,
New job in Brooklyn?
yeah.
Yep.
And she was making her do all the, they were just the fake records.
Mrs.
She never made mistakes doing addition, but
Yeah.
she just
Yeah.
did it slowly anyway.
And she
So-
told her to
She
redo
does
what
what
she
Good.
told her to redo her additions. And she said, she just did so.
So I'm going to do some scene setting after just arriving in Brooklyn and beginning work. What's the name of the shop? Bartocci's. How do you spell
BARTOCCI.
Shouldn't look at your face.
it? It's got an apostrophe S, isn't it? Because it's
Is that
it's
still around these days?
no, I don't think it is, but I've got, there's that photo of it in your handout, yeah? After beginning work at Bartocci, sorry, I use like it's called an ampersand, so it's a symbol for and. You're not allowed to use it, right? Sorry? Yeah, the ampersand is the swirly one, but it's the function of it, right? You're not allowed to use it. You have to write it out. I write everything in shorthand. Both. That's not normal. You have to write it out. And you have to get used to it. I've been doing it for 20 years, that's why I can't stop, right? After just arriving in Brooklyn, beginning work at Bartocci's, Ailish is
We're using maths.
challenged by her boss.
3 and 5 equals 8.
But despite being more than capable, is it and like so she calculates the numbers more slowly, or
She just does it again. So
okay?
she does it once, and then she knows she's not wrong, but she does it again because she's wrong. Does she not? Stop shaking her.
Okay, so
You're a mean little person.
here's concentrate. Right. So after just arriving in Brooklyn and beginning work at Bartocci's, which is all my setting up, Ailish is challenged by her boss, but despite being more than capable, which is beginning that discussion and sort of explanation, interpretation, she just did as she was told and rechecks her calculations. So it's part of the sentence. If I didn't have the inverted commas there to indicate that it was a quotation, you wouldn't even know. Right? Now I can keep going with that explanation and explain how that's passive. Okay? Now, yeah, so in terms of the talking marks, because this text contains narration and direct speech, when you're quoting narration, singles.
Okay.
When you're quoting the direct speech, something that Ailish says to Tony, for instance, talking marks.
So you like interchange between the two?
Yeah. If you think you're going to stuff it up, just stay to one type.
Yeah.
Yeah? But it's easy enough to notice, oh, this is narration, this is something that's said about her, as opposed to this is something she says. Does everyone understand what I mean by embed the evidence? Flow in the sentence. Okay? Do I need to keep going with that? Okay. In here, there are examples. So here's another one. Let's look at an example. So there's a couple of different ways of doing it. So you can have an introducing phrase and then the quotation, which is essentially what I've got there. So in the early part of the novel, Ailish believes herself unworthy of the opportunity of immigration. Topic sentence. Ailish wondered if her mother too believed that the wrong sister was leaving, thus suggesting that Ailish's trepidation to leave is based largely on her self-doubt. So, embedded in the sentence, but it's not part of the phrase, it's not part of the explanation. I couldn't take the talking marks out and it makes sense, so it is an embedded clause. Okay, comma and comma. That's where, like yesterday I talked about, you might put the brackets around if you're a younger student. Yeah. Here's another one. Rose is considered to be the most assertive and confident character in the text, standing in stark contrast to Ailish. Again, topic sentence. Rose, comma, merely by smiling at the hotel porter and other servicemen, can make them do her bidding. So you can almost see that it doesn't need to be a quote, it just flows as part of the discussion. Ailish, by comparison, tried to look as good as she could, showing from her narrative perspective that she has a deep-seated lack of confidence, blah, 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 blah. So it's part of the discussion. Move down.
Just like a unrelated question, what does it mean by time and patience would bring the sale to America?
It means that eventually that's going to happen, it's unavoidable, we're going to have to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So you can have the quote being part of the assertion. Okay, so if this is useful, that first one there, that's useful for the first piece of evidence. But if you're then going on to your second piece of evidence, you don't want another topic sentence. You just want to keep going. As Ailish considers the sacrifice being made by her sister, she understands that any real prospect of leaving was lost to Rose, and that Rose knew this all too. Okay, etc., etc. Right, so keep going. Ailish's dream of the screaming women and the silent children indicates her fear of the separation of her family through the desperation of the mothers and the lack of power of the children to do anything about it. At the same time, however, the fact the action is taken as a result of the orders of the judge leaves Ailish with no fear of it herself, suggesting she actually harbours a desire for independence but is reticent to reach for it on her own accord. Yeah, so you see this is more useful as that second and third piece of evidence, the inclusion in the assertion rather than the opening phrase and then the evidence. Now, those are there. I've written those examples and had, at that stage I think I had Mr. Matthews go over them. You know, I use you as an example, Jack. You wrote about the mother and the children yesterday, didn't you? In a passage, the mother and children, that image, that dream that she has. I think you picked that out as one of your micro passages to look at. What you've got there is a bit of discussion that you can have a look at and try and write something about yourself and see how you go mapped against that, perhaps choose some phrases from there to improve your own as a model paragraph, right? If they're not full paragraphs on their own, but they're a start that you can flesh out around if you wanted to do some practice. But embedding the evidence, it's important because it maintains the flow and cohesion of your writing, which is one of the criteria, but it also allows you and encourages you to explain the evidence. When people put quotes in on their own, as their own sentence, generally they don't explain them. Having it embedded in the discussion makes it much more likely that you will explain that evidence. Okay? Alright. I'm not going to go through this because I've already spent time unpacking the criteria for you. But if you missed that lesson, or if you want to remind yourself of what that's about, then there's these long discussions here about the very high criteria. Okay? You can read through it. It's written very simply. That's what they look like. We went through these in the very first lesson. So here are some practice prompts. Okay, so you've got 10 practice prompts. You've got time set in your homework. I think this week's too early. I think next week when you've got some essay practice, you might try and do some breakdowns of these prompts. You've got 10 here. There's 2 earlier at the start of the How to Write a Good Essay handout. Okay, so there's 2 more on top of these. But there's 10 here. Okay, and you can work through them as practice. These are practice for the exam as well. I think they cover 2 of the 4 types of questions. Okay?
For the SAT, will we have multiple?
You'll have 2 to choose from. So we had 3 in CloudStreet because we covered 2 themes and we had one that was sort of multi-theme. This one we're just going to give you 2, okay? And they'll cover some of the themes. They won't cover all of them.
How do the prompts work on the exam?
So you'll get 2 prompts on the exam for each text, and they're one of 4 different. So there are 4 types of questions you can be asked that focus on different things, and they can be a mix of 2 of those types of questions. So I've got a whole lesson on that at a later stage. I don't want to confuse you with that now. These questions will get you to talk about your interpretation and the ideas that come through the text by what the author does. That's what these are designed to do. So let's have a look. There's 10 there. Let's have a look at one. Okay? This is prompt number 3 in that list of 10. Okay? So what I've done is I have essentially broken down or talked about what I think the prompt is, but I haven't written up the notes on it. But then I've indicated what my essay would be in terms of the 4 points that I try and write. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 3, but I usually write 4 or 5 paragraphs. And then I've given you a couple of samples. So I just want to talk through this prompt. I'm going to break it down. It won't necessarily align with this interpretation in this plan because I'm doing it live. I haven't got notes. But I just want to talk to you and remind you the stages of breaking down a prompt. Now that we know that we're trying to write those type of paragraphs, that type of essay on that criteria, let's talk about how we break down a prompt. So, Tobin, don't worry about the accents on the names. Just got to spell it right, please. Resists.
What?
Toy bean. Yeah, is probably the correct pronunciation.
It's toy bean.
Not a real bean, it's a toy bean.
Or toe bean, that you eat. Like, yeah, I've heard it both ways.
And you see how I'm saying toy mode really fast. It's tons of different.
No.
I was going to.
Someone probably
Yeah, exactly. So are they paragraphs?
Okay. Now, let me point out something really. Let me point out something really important to you. If you wrote on this sack, if this was a sack and you wrote on it, and you misspell Tobin's name, or you misspell Ailish's name, that's not okay. Because it's in the prompt.
So you
None
the
of them will
accents
change.
are in the prompt, you don't use it.
No, I don't think you need to use the accents. It's not required. Okay? But I would expect you to spell those names correctly, regardless of whether they're in the prompt. But if they're in the prompt and you still get them wrong, oh my lord, that's just being careless.
If you spell them both wrong in the one, like on the exam, you keep on the wall.
That's
What
what
it
it
is.
is. The
What?
accent's on the O, not the first part.
So it might just be that it's the way that the word does it, I don't know. But I don't worry about the accents, right? So, names of characters, the name of the author, the names of the towns. So Brooklyn and Enniscorthy, those are things you have to get right. If you're not good at spelling, look, say, cover, write, check. Okay, until you get them right. Okay? Do those, Miss Wallace talks about those little things that you do in terms of saying them in the ways that they're spelled. So, you sound out leopard every time you want to write leopard. All of those sorts of things. When I want to write Q as in to queue up for something, I always say Q-U-E. Yeah? So, do that for the names, the places, all of those sorts of things. There's our prompt. Let's remember the steps to respond, because you can't just look at it and immediately have something pop into your head. You're very fortunate if you can do that. I can't do that. I need to identify, first up, the instruction. Because sometimes you'll get, do you agree? To what extent is this true? And other times you'll get things like discuss. Discuss really says, because this is in an inverted commas, says that this is an interpretation, evaluate it. Tell me whether you think that's true or not. Discuss the validity of that. If you had, do you agree? It's really asking you one way or the other. Discuss gives you more variety and options. So we identify the instruction, discuss. Discuss means we need depth, we need exploration, we need some consideration. You can give and take, you can sit in the grey area if you like.
So if it's like, do you agree, and it's basically asking for a hard and fast yes.
Yeah, it's asking for a more one-sided affair. Yes, I do, or no, I don't. And you could have, look, I agree, but there's some aspects that I'd like to clarify, that sort of thing. Obviously, that's not what you're saying, but that's what you would be doing.
Yeah.
This one, you can really go, this launches me off in places. Okay. So let's look at where it's sending us. Uplifting story is a key phrase. Complex portrait is another phrase, and it's telling us that we have to talk about Ailish. Okay? This is a hard question, which is why I chose to do it, break it down here and show you a response, because it's not a question about the characters, it's a question about the author and his intent. So I can read that and I can go, well, what's it really asking me? And sometimes all it takes is identifying those key phrases to read back over it and identify what the underlying questions are. But I can go, okay, so is it an uplifting story or a complex portrait? So these are opposing. They're the ends of the spectrum. Which one is it? Is it both? Is it neither? Okay? So is it one or the other? Is it neither? Is it something else? So I have to really think about where I sit there. Now, uplifting story means that, we have hope for Ailish. We have hope that she's made the right decision. We feel very positive about her. Now, perhaps at the start of the story we didn't, and at the end of the story we do, perhaps. Okay? The complex portrait might instead be that we have some unresolved questions. So we might have a mix of hope, but we might also have some doubt in that too. So for instance, we might be hopeful that she's returning to a better life, but we might be left wondering, does she really love Tony? Or is she just using him to facilitate that independence and growth? Right? We might also not really care about what's going to happen to her next, but be more concerned about how she's got there and whether she's gone about it in the right way. So that would have a mix or a set of unresolved questions. So I've got to decide what I think. Here's my interpretation for that prompt. But do you see the stages I've gone through? I've identified the key phrases. I know my essay has to be largely about her and the way she interacts with most of the characters. And what I've tried to identify, so I've done key phrases. Any focuses. So in this case that was Ailish. Okay, and then I might also look at any limitations as a good one, or comparisons. So in this case it was comparisons between those two phrases. So I can't remember what I did this last year, I typed this up last year. So what did I say? I said, for this prompt, my interpretation, my overarching response is going to be that Tobin constructs a character who struggles with the necessary hardships involved in leading a comfortable existence and growing into an independent and fulfilling life. So yes, at the end, there's positivity, but what we struggle with are these hardships, okay? But they're necessary. So actually, it is a fairly uplifting, hopeful story, I guess is what I'm trying to say there. Yeah. It's complex though, there's a degree of complexity because it's not a straightforward, pleasant trip. There's necessary hardships. So can you see me sort of exploring this? It's something else. It's not uplifting cleanly, it's not complex completely. It's uplifting, but it's a hard road to get there. Okay, let's have a look at what I'm going to talk about. So this is my paragraph plan. So I have 3 paragraphs, and in each one I've got some points that I want to explore. So I'm going to talk about family as comfort and the familiar, but restricting and limiting. So I'm sort of thinking, where are the positives and where are the negatives? I want to keep weighing those up because that's that complex portrait. Yeah. I'm going to talk about independence coming with a sense of isolation and fear, but following on to an opportunity and reinvention. So again, I'm thinking about the way there's this hope at the end, but it's hard to begin with. And then finally, duty to others, but also a duty to yourself. So again, I'm structuring around that complexity, that fact that we get to a good place, but it's hard to get there. See how all 3 of my points are based around that? Yeah? And there's some details there in terms of what evidence I'm going to use, etc. Okay, so together the plan and the interpretation, they're the backbone of my introduction, but obviously these are my topic sentences, so I'm going to rephrase those for my introduction. I'm not going to use any of these points because they're my evidence. Okay? The wording would be useful in that paragraph, threaded together, more direct links to the text, etc., etc. Here's the sample paragraph. So the final paragraph, that duty to others but a duty to yourself, I've written that up. Would you like me to go through that with you?
Is that only 2 pieces of evidence? Is this 2 dot points? Or is it...
There might be, I'm not quite sure. Can't remember, I haven't read it for a year. Okay, let's have a look. So here's what I've written, and here's some comments about it. Can't remember if it's any good or not, I might not like it a year later. After Ailish has settled into her life in Brooklyn to some extent and had a chance to develop her independence and the benefits of new experiences in opening new opportunities for her, she is suddenly confronted with the need to return home. That's a long sentence, it needs to be broken up.
Hating on yourself.
Yeah, it's got an embedded clause that's not indicated with commas, but it should probably be 2 sentences. The sense of obligation to return to her old life is clearly established in the letter from Jack that Tobin includes as an interruption to the narration. In the letter, Jack speaks about the house being full of people, but now there isn't a sound, and Mammy not wanting him to say that she's crying all the time. These details serve to make Ailish guilty that she was not present with all the others that came to Berry Rose and provoke her to see the need to return home. Ailish says after the letter that she realised that she could not stay on her own now. But despite this and her understanding of her ability to go immediately and buy a fare home and wait for the boat, Tobin has Ailish not do this and instead go to meet Tony, who represents her new family and connection in America. That's another fairly long sentence. Not only this, but Tobin has the Catholic Ailish have sex with Tony and subsequently marry him as a result, which complicates her ability to leave him and then return to her homeland. Stalling Ailish's return to her mother communicates her sense of obligation to go home, but her unspoken desire not to abandon this new life. This tension is important in exploring the way that accepting that our past selves are irrevocably changed and thus our priorities changed by achieving independence does not mean our sense of duty is erased. So that's that complex portrait. So some long sentences, that's my weakness. But, you know, there's a link to my imagined second point. So as a topic sentence, I am trying to connect the paragraphs of my essay together. I'm setting up the context of where the evidence comes from as well. Probably need to have broken that into 2 sentences. I use keywords, obligation to link to the theme, also directly reference the change in the style of writing. So there's meta language in there. After including a number of quotes from the letter, I indicate their intended purpose, show that it works by having narration of Ailish's reaction also included. I refer to Tobin explicitly, constructing Ailish's behaviours to complicate her choices. I've got the link to the idea of the tussle between obligation and opportunity, which is that complex portrait. And then I finish the paragraph with a clear discussion of the values. I don't mention those in relation to character or plot point. Okay, it's beyond the novel. It's about the reader's possible reaction and understanding. Okay, so there's a sample paragraph for you. Okay, so that's not a full paragraph for me. That's maybe a short paragraph that I'd follow with another one. So I've got there's another dot point really to be dealt with. Okay, so 5 or 6 short paragraphs rather than 3 or 4 longer ones is usually what I do. Okay. Here is another breakdown. Prompt 7 from the collection of 10. So you might like to have a go at prompt 7 without looking at this and then compare it against what I would have done. There's the paragraph plan, but there's no sample response there. Okay. Cool. And if you have a look, I've done an interpretation and then I didn't like it and I had another go. It doesn't always come that easy to me either. So, prompt 7 is not a bad one to have a go at early because you've got an answer in a sense to compare it to. It doesn't mean that yours is wrong if it's not the same as mine, but you can see and compare to your own. Okay, so that was the prompt breakdown. So there's 10 there for you to do. And then right back on page 23 of this handout, there it is. There's 2 that aren't in that 10. Okay, so you've got 12 in total that you can play with. You might like to try breaking some down, like I've broken down at the end there. Okay, work out what they're about, come up with an interpretation, plan out some points, and get some feedback on that. You might like to do that at the same time as doing those sample bits of writing around the passage, the short passage activities. Further into the unit, you might like to do a plan, and like I've done, write a paragraph based on one of the moments in that plan. Okay? So today, what I've done, I've talked to you about overall essay structure, intro, conclusion, body. What goes in the intro, what goes in the conclusion. Pretty straightforward. I've talked to you about the teal paragraph structure and how that meets the criteria for this SAC, how it's also going to be useful in the exam, and I've given you a more detailed memory aid to flesh out what is an otherwise fairly easy to stuff up method, TEAL. Alright? I've talked to you and shown you some examples of the embedded evidence that makes sure that you're discussing the evidence, not just including the evidence. Because if you only include the evidence and you don't discuss it, you can't get above a C. Okay? If everything else is right, but you've only included evidence and not discussed it, C is your ceiling. So you've got to embed it to give yourself a chance to discuss it. You've got to make sure you're doing that. And then we've talked about how to break down a prompt, and we've shown you some examples. So covered quite a lot of ground today. My throat is dry and scratchy because I've done all the talking and you've done all the listening. You can listen back to it on the video as many times as you like. You might like to queue up the video when you're doing a practice and listen back to the hand thing or the overall structure thing, or listen to the examples of the embedded evidence. You're welcome to do that as you wish. I'm going to try and load it up this afternoon. Okay? It'll go on YouTube and there'll be a link put into Sector, so it's embedded in Sector in today's lesson. Okay? That'll be where it
other
goes.
people watch your videos.
I'll send it to the others in the other classes, but
No,
No, it's on YouTube.
my YouTube's in public.
Do you have any comments? Nice.
Really?
Some kid from Argentina.
No, my blog used to get hits because they'd search the text and stuff, but and word reading. Anyway, that's all. I'm going to stop the video now.